Hip lock is a term that I first heard from Franz Bosch that is really important for both speed and change of direction work. Hip lock is the ability to abduct the pelvis in the frontal plane in a closed stance situation. So when we see an athlete sprinting, once their foot touches the ground, as they push off, we want to see that opposite hip rise in the air, so they're abducting with the foot that's on the ground. It's really important for max velocity sprinting, acceleration, but also for change of direction during activities like a sidestep. So when an athlete performs a sidestep and they're keeping their toes downhill, when their foot touches, we don't want to see them get too much into stance leg adduction. We want them to be able to resist that adduction with a good hip lock as they abduct and push out. So a couple of the things that we need to train first, so it's the ability to actually abduct the hip in the frontal plane and the ability to resist adduction and create stiffness in the hip to, again, resist adduction so we have a good, stable hip lock. One of the ways that we'd like to train just kind of the first part of this, which is the ability to move in the frontal plane, so to have that good hip abduction, is with the Spider-Man crawl. So the Spider-Man crawl, we have the athlete get on all fours in a good push-up position, and they're trying to bring their knee and elbow together. So watching from this right side, my right hip is abducted while my left side is abducted. So my left trunk is abducted, and then we switch. Now I'm abducting on my left pelvis and abducting in my right trunk. So this is a little bit more of a kind of a trunk control emphasis. Once that's easy, we can go into a low sled push. So with a low sled push, we're working on that same quad here, but now we're really working on pushing through the hip. So as I take that nice step up, I'm abducting on my left side, pushing, getting the hip abduction on my right side. Those are two of the ways that we like to just train that ability to move the pelvis in the frontal plane and work on rising that opposite side by pushing into the floor with the foot. We're gonna go over a few more progressions, different exercises that we like to train that frontal plane component of the pelvis. After the Spider-Man crawl and the low sled push, some of the progressions that we like are going to be a step up to box and a half kneeling step up. So again, what we're looking for is that frontal plane motion of the pelvis. So I will have athletes tuck in their shirt so I can watch their waistband move to be able to see which side is abducting and which side is adducting. So we're going to take a low box here. This is probably a 3 to 4 inch box. Have the athlete start with their foot up on that. So if you're looking at me from behind, my left pelvis is higher than my right pelvis. So I'm starting in right hip abduction, but we're working on the left hip in this one. So we're gonna start with the opposite arm forward. They're gonna drive their foot through the block and step up. So what you should see from behind is that now my right pelvis is higher than my left. So we're now getting the left hip abduction. We'll have the athlete control this on the way down. So we're working on that kind of concentric power with the foot that's starting elevated off the block. Push, getting a good position, controlling the way down. Push, we're working on knee extension, hip abduction, hip extension, hip external rotation. I'm really working that left side with this. Nice and controlled, getting them to really feel that ability to push through the floor and abduct their stance side and raise the contralateral side. Once that's easy, we can have them work through a deeper range of motion with a half kneeling step up. So we're gonna start in front of the same box. And that's one thing, like, you need the box to be high enough that's going to force them to actually abduct their hips. So if I was stepping to a box that was a little bit lower, it's not high enough for me to force me into hip abduction. So you want to make sure that you're giving the athlete a box that challenges them enough that they have to really push through the floor to raise their opposite side. So from a half kneeling position, the same thing, pushing through that front leg, rising up, controlling on the way down, push. And again, I want to see that opposite hip rise so I know they're getting good hip abduction on their stance side. Once the athlete has showed competency and the ability to actually abduct that hip, so to get in that good hip lock position, we have to train the ability to basically create stiffness in that position. So once their foot hits the ground, we don't want to see them lose that hip lock and dampen all that force that they're trying to have push them into the next step. So one of the things that we'll do, again, have them tuck their shirt in so I can watch their hips move, and we'll start with a low box run. So the athlete's gonna start standing tall. So right now my hips are level, but as I drop to the floor, my right hip becomes lower than my left, so I'm getting into hip abduction on my right side. If I can't control my body weight, you'll see my hip buckle. What we're trying to do is resist that motion. So we'll have the athlete basically do a high knee run or an A run in this position. they should be keeping the left hip higher than the right the entire time. We can also do a boom, which is almost like a traveling version of that. So the athlete will start with one knee high, and now I'm maintaining a hip lock on my right side every time. While the low box run and booms emphasize that hip control, more so in the sagittal plane, as the athlete's not really abducting their foot at all, it's more of a kind of a hip extension and abduction mechanism. What we're going to work on too is the ability to control that motion more in the frontal plane. So I want to see more actual femoral abduction. So one of the things that I'll do to get athletes comfortable is just getting their foot out, because to be able to change direction, I have to be able to get my foot outside my center of mass, whether I'm doing a lateral cut or a side step. I'll have an athlete go against the wall, take a pretty wide stance, and try to lift up their inside leg. What we're training is that ability to, again, lock the hip in the frontal plane in abduction. So you should see my left hip be higher than my right in this position. I always want that little bit of a soft knee, so we're also engaging their quad in this position. This is easy. I can have the athlete kind of bend and push just to get them comfortable, again, engaging their glutes, getting that good hip lock, and allowing their quad to go from flexion to extension. Now, working on that ability to create stiffness more so in the frontal plane for more of like a change of direction, we love hide-ins. So we'll have the athlete start on one foot, and I call it a quick and stick. So they're going to go quick off their opposite side and then stick again on their initial leg. So we're going to have the athlete bend, they're going to push and get back. So what we should see is once that foot hits, if we're to slow everything down, what we don't want to see is too much give on that opposite side. So we're working on that ability to create stiffness in the frontal plane to reverse our momentum and come back to the direction that we came. So again, love having athletes tuck in their shirt so I can watch what's going on at their hip. So we should see initially the stance side should probably be a little bit higher. My belt line should be down at a diagonal, and then should reverse as we perform the movement. Trying to be quick off that opposite side and limiting that rotation towards the stance leg to again work on that good hip lock. After a hide-in, an easy, simple progression is the Icky Shuffle in a speed ladder. We're not saying the speed ladder is going to get you faster, but the speed ladder is a great way to work on finding good shin angles and start working on some of those change of direction qualities and working on that stiffness that's necessary to have really effective and quick, sharp changes of direction. So with the Icky Shuffle, I want the athlete sticking on the side of the ladder that they start, but I want to see a really aggressive foot plant and cut off of that opposite side. So again, I'm watching the athlete's waistband, I don't want to see them come in and be a really slow cut where that opposite hip drops and they rotate towards the stance. Like I want to see them resist their momentum and push themselves back out of the cut. So they come in and quick out. One of the things that I like about the Icky Shuffle as well is if you watch somebody's foot plant, because they're moving themselves forward the entire time, it's not just out to the side, they have to be able to push down and back to be able to advance themselves into the next run. That's a really simple progression for the hip lock, working on the sagittal plane and more of a frontal plane emphasis, starting with improving the actual ability to move the pelvis in the frontal plane, and then working on the necessary stiffness components that allow athletes to execute a hip lock at a high level.